let's see how far we've got. Well, what I've done is I've fabricated running boards or foot plates which run the whole length of the locomotive. It's just plastic with some timber, square timber underneath to stiffen it, slotted to fit into the existing frame, running from buffer beam to buffer beam. I've got to make some buffer beams up out of some thinner material, and this whole frame would have been fabricated as a single flat sheet with the, I won't call it a frame, this whole flat level, because the frames were the bits that run down the side supporting the wheels. Anyway, two little bits need to cut out for the boilers. Need to fill in the gaps. There's a gap and there's a gap. But unless I drastically modify the cab, well, the simple thing is, if I want the cab to fit, I have to cut off the bottom of the bunker, and it would then fit over the frame. The alternative is to cut off these frames that I've been carefully making so that the cab and bunker fit on as they are. And the simpler option is actually to cut the frame here, having carefully trimmed the wood, having carefully measured it, everything I've done, because then the bunker fits on, and that's it, it's cutting off the bottom of the bunker to fit over that frame. So I think that's what I'm going to do. It's all trial and error. That's what it is. As you go along, you just see what works, see how it looks, trim round things, see if they go together. And fixing things in place, you could take the engineering approach and drill and tap and screw it together. But at the moment, unless I need to replace the motor inside that motor block, I don't need to take any of these components apart or replace the wheels. And so I can glue this into position on here. And if I use something like U-Hoo, it is possible to prise the glue joint apart if you do need to get into it. So my thoughts at the moment are just to glue it into place rather than drill and tap and screw it in. Anyway, we'll see how I get on. Modifying one of these things isn't hard. This is the Piko 060 locomotive. Doesn't matter which model, they're all to a similar basic form. I have a number of saws. That's, balance it on there, is a coping saw. That is useful in terms of having a fine blade. Here I've got a fret saw. It's a treadle fret saw. It's much easier if you want to cut slots to use a hand fret saw, and I do have a fret saw. But the coping saw does mostly a similar job. That's a nice blade, the right size teeth are doing a good tough cut. And I've got a couple of these cheap, not quite pound shop. That's got an aluminium frame, so that's quite good. This has got really cheap and nasty. If you put a decent blade in it, you can get a cut. But that's what I use if I can get it in. And I'm about to take the steam dome off, and I'll be taking it off with this saw here. The reason being, it's far more controllable than those thin silly blades, and if you can get it in, it's much easier to use once you've got the locomotive supported. If you can't get that in, obviously you have to go for another saw. That's relatively cheap, 10-inch saw, designed for cutting wood but works perfectly well on the plastic. So that's the saws. The only glue I'm using is U-Hoo, upside down there. It glues the plastic, glues the wood, and I don't have to worry about whether the plastic is of the same type as what the body's moulded in. although plastic weld is an alternative if the plastic is the right type of plastic. Let's see where I get to now. Oh, the other thing, I'm not quite sure if I did a video of it, is how easy it is to make a sort of transformation. I've cut it open like that. I can't do it on the other side because that's where the driver sits, and it would be a little bit too obvious because the back head protrudes reasonably well into the cab, and I've not bothered to cut the back head back and push it back, but there we have that bit. And I'm going to put some side tanks on it, so I'm going to hide the firebox and ash grate there. Bring the side tanks along to about there, I think. What's this for? That's for the basic Hornby 00 gauge loco, just to get an idea of proportions. Proportions for the tank. Look how streamlined these are. Look how smooth, with the same plate being used for the side tanks and the cab. Not too cluttered above the boiler. So that gives me an indication of the general look and feel of a locomotive. This isn't going to get quite that close, and we'll see how we proceed in terms of getting it to that sort of level. But the main thing we note about these, again, far more elegant than the Continental Outline ones. A buffer beam, the plate runs straight along buffer beam. Simple. You've got the side frames in there and what some people call the foot plate or running board running straight through. Nice and streamlined construction, none of this stepping up and down all over the place.